Please welcome your hosts to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Who here is as excited as we are for Config 2026?
I think you're a little more excited than that. Who is excited for Config 2026?
Let's hear it.
Oh my God, that is so powerful feeling. Thank you. To everyone in the room and everyone online, we're so happy to welcome you to the mezzanine stage. My name is Rachel Miller, and I lead the engineering team on design systems at Figma.
And my name is Megan Benarzik, and I lead design for Collab Tools.
We're beyond excited to be hanging out with you all for the next 2 days. We have an incredible and inspiring lineup of speakers.
Right? I'm actually itching to get back to design. Maybe I'll tell my agents to get cooking on some ideas I had during the keynote while we listen to these talks.
I love it, but let's let the agents handle that in the background to give the speakers our undivided attention. Please silence your phones, close any extra tabs if you're watching us online, and give your undivided attention to our first speaker of the morning session, Vicki Tan.
Vicki is a designer and author who's going to tell us all about her experience designing a children's book about decision making.
Decision making, one of the few things that AI still can't do without us. Again, please give me a warm welcome for Vicki to the stage.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for being here. Okay, so actually just want to say it's not for children, the book is for adults. All right, so there is a feeling that I have been trying to name for a long time. And it's a kind of restlessness, but that's not quite the right word, because I think it's more directional. The feeling isn't anxiety or boredom, but it's something in you that wants to go somewhere, even if you can't yet say where. Jungian psychology has a name for this, a floating charge of energy not attached to its right object. And that idea was first described by Marie-Louise von Franz, who was Carl Jung's closest collaborator. And she described this force or drive that should be directed towards something meaningful, which is energy that has somewhere to go but is not yet where it belongs. And in Chinese traditional medicine, they call this stagnant qi, so creative energy in the body that can't quite find its channel. And I think we each feel this in our own way. Some of us feel it embodied as a flutter in your chest that won't quite settle. And some of us feel it more emotionally, as a pull towards something hard to grasp. It might also come out as a specific obsession, like something that you can't stop tinkering with. So I'm going to share the story about what happened when I followed my energy. Ostensibly, it's a talk about how I made a book, but more than that, this talk is about how you might be ready to make your own thing. And that thing, which is what I'm calling unmistakably yours. So my energy had been pulling me towards questions of self-coherence. Why don't we always act in our own best interest? And what's going on inside of us when we get stuck? Not because I don't get stuck, but exactly because I do. It's why I studied behavioral science. It's how I ended up working in research at the beginning of my career. And it's because, to me, cognitive biases have always felt like this set of secret codes, keys to noticing when your brain is on autopilot. If you can see how your biases show up, you can decide whether or not they're helping you. And behavioral science is really good at this, naming the mechanism, but knowing something rarely changes our behavior. Yet, as designers, we change people's behavior every day, not by explaining how things work, but by showing how it's done. And I noticed that people don't actually sit down and make decisions with cognitive biases, with something like this cognitive bias codex in their everyday lives. The codex is really cool to see all the biases laid out, but you could say it isn't usable. So I wanted to make something more tangible, something you could hold in your hands, something that could actually help people change their behavior through the lens of cognitive bias. So I started with this movable cognitive bias wheel, where you explore each bias strategy one at a time by rotating it. That evolved into these movable spreads that show bias in everyday life, and you could pull the tab or rotate the page, and then the bias would be revealed, kind of like pulling a curtain up on reality. That turned into a pocket guide to bias, and then that turned into a full manuscript filled with words that I had somehow written. And then finally, a published hardcover book. But that is the social media version of the talk, because what actually happened is that I got stuck in between that concept and the proposal for a few years, plus a pandemic break. At that time, I was living in Brooklyn, and I'd been walking around Fort Greene with a friend who really wanted to quit her full-time job. And faithful to my science, I would try to help her by identifying what might be keeping her stuck. I thought, my rational brain kept thinking, if you could just explain loss aversion to her, if you could help her understand status quo bias, of course, surely she would leave her job. But my friend did understand cognitively what was happening, and yet she was stuck. So that night, I had made her my favorite Taiwanese dish, mapo tofu, just like my mom used to cook when we were growing up. And I told her that I had been making this dish a lot during my time off. And eating the same thing every day wasn't a chore, but rather it was a comfort to return to the flavors that we were raised on, especially when so much else had changed in my routine. Over dinner, I talked about how I had structured my time off around a self-reinforcing budget. So instead of a timeline, the more self-sustaining my projects were, the more that I could explore. And mapo tofu was a part of that math. And then something happened for her in between tofu and spreadsheet. I think quitting finally felt like something she could do. It was no longer just this big, scary idea. And seeing it click for her, I think something really shifted for me too. I realized that the book didn't need to teach cognitive bias on its face. It just needed to help people experience the lived, applied wisdom of behavioral science in a way that they could easily place themselves in. So that bias was the denomination effect, and it's where we overweight large things and undervalue small recurring ones. And in other words, it just means like the big career decision felt really enormous and heavy, but the small everyday choice was what added up. So naming the bias wasn't that important, but feeling it, her being able to recognize it in herself, that was what mattered. And mapo tofu was the first story that I wrote about, and the rest of the book really grew around that idea, which was leading with the personal and the possible. So here's my book, designed completely in Figma, and it's called Ask This Book a Question, and it's a guide to life's big and little decisions. I'm just going to give you a quick tour, and then we'll go back to the story of how it got made. So it's a choose your own adventure, and it starts with that question that you've been stuck on. It could be, why can't I quit my job? Or how do I regain my creative energy? Anything that's been stuck for you. And the book asks you to pass your question through a couple of lenses, by topic, by subtopic, and how those things relate to each other. By timing, is your question urgent or is it once in a lifetime? And then how all of those things intersect. More and more of these pages that help you look at your question in a different way, and you find a page that resonates with you, and you'll be taken to that story, either from my life or my mentors. They could be the mapo tofu story or one about Charlie, my dog. And at the end of each story, I will name the biases that showed up in situ. And if you are so inclined, you can follow it to that page to learn more about how that bias looks when it's working for you, when it's working against you, which are, I'm calling the light and shadow of the bias. Just like Jung said, making conscious what was unconscious. So that's my book. We can go back to that night after dinner when I was still sitting with that kernel of insight from my friend. Because to turn an idea into a real book, the first step is to write a proposal. And I had never written one. And I think a writer would start with the words, but that was the part that I was least comfortable with because I had never taken a writing class. Luckily, writing is just one part of the book. I think there is helping the reader understand, there's connecting with what they care about, it's about making things difficult, easier to understand, and that is all what design is. So I started with what I had, and you'll notice that, yes, the proposal looks like a flow chart, and you'd navigate it the same way you would navigate an app or a website. And this is where the Choose Your Own Adventure was formed. Truth be told, the proposal did look like UI at this point, but I knew that I could make it better with the visuals, the illustration, and the cover. But I was so deep in the writing that I asked a few illustrator friends to help. First, Ryan, shout out Ryan, who layered line work onto clay for this really tactile feel. And then Karen, with these playful illustrations of me and Charlie. I really love both styles, but the publisher said that they didn't match my voice. They felt too polished, a little too professional. And I remember thinking to myself, isn't that good? But it turns out, not exactly. Because the book cover process went the same way. I came up with these cool concepts that I thought would make for a cool cover. And then I tried my hand at a couple of these covers. But I am not a graphic designer. I wasn't really happy with them. So I kept exploring more. I hired a professional cover designer who made these beautiful covers from my concepts. But I kept getting the same feedback from the publisher, which was they didn't feel like they matched my voice. So we went back to the blue door, which the publisher really liked. And at this point in the process, I regretted ever showing the blue door. I had seen so many iterations of this blue door, but by the end, I started to agree begrudgingly that I think the book had to feel like me inside and out. And so in the end, we did go with my cover. We went with my unrefined illustrations and my non-literary writing. And it wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakably mine. And what made the book mine wasn't the polish, it was the one that I knew, it was that I knew the stories, and I was the one who saw the biases in them, and I felt the connection between them. And so I think the visual had to come from me too, because that's how the story finds the listener. So in the end, it was just me using what I already had. And I say this only to say that there's a version of this for you. You can take what you already know, your skills, your way of thinking, even the things you've been shying away from, and then you can pair them with that energy we've been talking about, and you'll start to see how capable you are once that energy finds its right object. Ooh, wrong way. In the end, the hardest thing actually, though, about writing the book wasn't the writing itself. It was what the writing asked of me. So when I was researching the book, I got all of these questions about what people were stuck on. I mapped those questions into topics and subtopics, and then I used that to fill in the book in this non-linear way. And unfortunately, there's no project manager when you write a book. It's just you and your subconscious pushing certain topics to the bottom of the pile. And the topics that I was avoiding, they weren't technically hard, but they were personally hard because they were about emotions, relationships, purpose in life, on what authority was I going to write about these things that I had not yet figured out myself? It just felt like a whole new type of insecurity. And so, in the very last months of writing, with the deadline looming, I started digging deeper. And buried in an old journal, years before the book was even an idea, I had jotted down this memory of my dad in an office goods store. I was in elementary school. We were shopping for back to school supplies, and I remember really relishing being in that store with its precise organization of little things in their designated drawers. And that day I had sneakily taken 10 sticks of Pentel 0.5 millimeter lead. And perhaps it was embarrassingly the smallest item in the store, but I had hidden them inside another tube. I don't know why, but when we went to check out with our office goods and one heavy tube of lead, the clerk noticed and he asked my dad if he knew how that had happened, looking at me the whole time. And without missing a beat, my dad came to my defense. And standing there mute, I think I felt the simultaneous swelling of pride and cowering shame, both all at once. My dad died when I was almost 12, and it was sudden, without warning, on a Sunday morning when he was playing basketball. And in the months and years after, all of my memories of him went quiet. I tried to recall that one on the page in the office goods store, but at the time it felt flat on the page. It had no ending and no energy. And it was only with the book, coming back to it with a reason to look harder, that the memory came back differently. It was more vivid and textured, and it was as if it was remade in the act of looking. A meditation teacher once reframed that word, remembering, to me as not as recalling, but as literal remembering, which is reconnecting with the parts of yourself that you had forgotten, or the members of yourself that you had cut off. And to feel the sensations in your body that you had blocked off is to become whole again. And so when that memory came back, more recollections, details, and feelings from that part of my life came back with it. I think once I let myself stop treating those feelings as interruptions and started letting them enter, I began to recover the memories that I had lost. Like a frog hopping in the rain, not thinking of the millions of small drops as this terrible weather, but as the immense, unstoppable rush of life. So Pentel 0.5 millimeter lead was one of the last stories that I wrote in the book. It was the one about emotions and about feeling things again. And it was a little bit scary to share, but once it was out, I think the rest of them came a little bit differently. Not easier exactly, but with more space to explore. So something shifted for me after that. It wasn't dramatic or life-changing, but I think what changed inside was my capacity to notice. I think I could finally sit with the feeling of being both terrified and excited, and then do something with it. And I think that's where the energy goes. Not into the thing, but really through you. And so it turns out this is how tending to creativity works. You follow your curiosity, you use what you already have, and then you change as the work asks of you. And then you begin again. And the structure that I use to tell my story is called Kisho Tenketsu. It's actually a 4-part form from classical Chinese poetry. And unlike the hero's journey we usually get told, there's no point at which everything resolves and you're done. You change because of what you notice, and because of that turn that comes from the inside, rather than from anything outside of you. And the clues to your energy are everywhere. Sometimes it's easier to see them in your closest friends. One of my friends is a design professor who started this tiny Taiwanese microfarm with her mom, and they teach the locals how to cook with local plants and agricultural traditions, and they even make soap from cactus. My other friend is a design manager who used to be a musician, and he keeps making these little tools for artists, like set list trackers and stems libraries. These are the types of things that only they, in their particular lives, could have made by following their energy. And I share these examples to say, again, that you have one too. It's the thing that came to mind when I introduced this idea. Hopefully, it's been percolating ever since. And sometimes it can be easier to find it by looking near it or around it, not directly at it. And if you can't quite see your own yet, maybe ask your closest friends, because sometimes they can see you more clearly than you can see yourself. So when the floating charge of energy finds its direction, the question stops following you and you start following it. So now I would like to leave you with a feeling to help you remember this idea in the weeks and months after today. If you'll indulge me, I'm gonna take a sip of water. And I'm going to read you one of my favorite poems, and it's called Everything is Waiting for You. You can close your eyes if you'd like, and you can just let yourself listen to my voice. I can't open that. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely, even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come, and the doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. And the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and the creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. Thank you. If your eyes are still closed, you can open them. And this is just your invitation to notice, where is your energy leading you? And if you'd like a companion as you follow your energy, well, I wrote a book for you. Thank you.